Welcome back to Leasehold Made Simple Week. Today we're going to be talking about how to plan a successful enfranchisement claim. And I've got Ian with me today. So Ian, would you like to just explain what enfranchisement is?
Absolutely. So enfranchisement is a statutory procedure which groups of flat owners run to compulsorily purchase their freehold interest from their landlord. That process can be run by where there's two or more flats in a building and where at least 50% of the leaseholders in the building want to group together and run the process. So that's the first stage of the enfranchisement process. We would look at whether the building qualifies, whether the tenants qualify, and what we tend to look at is are the leases of each, are all the flats on long leases? Do one or more flats? Sorry, are one or more flats held by the same owners? Because sometimes multiple ownership of flats can exclude people from being qualifying tenants. We also look at whether there's any commercial element, because buildings where there's 25% or more commercial non-residential usage, that can exclude the building from the process. Sometimes we would inquire whether there's a resident landlord in smaller buildings, because if the freeholder was the person who converted that building into a block of flats and issued the leases, then it would be exempt from the process. We also look at whether the building itself is separable. So can it be, is there any overlapping between it and the surrounding structures that would discount it from qualification, because the actual test that applies to the building is that it must be a separable part of a building or a building. Sometimes buildings will fall foul of that test. And at that initial stage, we may actually refer the clients to a surveyor to consider whether the building is separable, whether the services and the structure itself are separable. Also, as part of that preliminary planning process, the leaseholders will want to know what the freehold's going to roughly cost them. So we're going to be reviewing, the lengths of the individual leases, whether everyone's participating, because some of the non-participating flats they'll need to be paid for, and we need to consider who's going to pay for those parts on the transaction. We're also looking at, so we're setting a budget, and that may be in conjunction with the clients going out and getting external valuation advice from an expert surveyor, and we're looking at how the group might want to structure its ownership, and we're reviewing the title structure of the building. I know for a fact that you had a case recently where the terms of the leases played into what the clients what they acquired and what their interest was subject to when they got the freehold over the line. Perhaps you just tell our viewers how that worked and how that's important to check as well.
Yeah, so it's always important to check the leases. Even when purchasing the freehold, it's still important to check, because ultimately you're going to be taking over sort of those lease covenants, and they can be sort of transferred over to the freehold title.
Yeah, they can. I think in the case that you dealt with recently, the freeholder was fairly insistent that the incoming tenants who are enfranchising would be bound by the rules, the existing covenants in their leases. So the expectation that they could rewrite their leases when they purchased, that disappeared quite quickly, didn't it? When we got into arguments around what the terms of the transfer would ultimately be.
Yeah, so the solution to that is there's two options. You can either go to tribunal and sort of argue it out there and sort of let the judge make a determination, or you can simply offer the freeholder more money to sort of remove those restrictive covenants.
Yeah, I think it really boils down to what the client's prepared to tolerate and what's reasonable. Because in that example that you were running, there was no reason whatsoever why the outgoing freeholder needed to apply these restrictions on the freehold title moving forward. It was just to inconvenience the leaseholders. So I think that kind of covers off the first stage of the process.
Yeah. What about when we sort of come up with issues between leaseholders? Like, is there any kind of agreement we can put in place?
Yeah, again, it's actually, in fact, it's in the first stage of the planning process where we would recommend and circulate a participation agreement that sets out essentially what people are budgeting to pay in terms of their contributions, in terms towards the valuation and the legals. And on some occasions it can even set out what they're expecting to happen post-completion. Some of our clients may have expectations that loft spaces will be demised to them for their future use, or there's gardens will be exchanged, front areas will be demised exclusively to the ground floor flat, so that people enfranchise not necessarily because they've got low leases, because they want to change the scheme of the building and have additional demise, or and have the ability to maybe extend or even do loft conversions.
Yeah. So once all of those issues are sort of ironed out, then we go on to serving the notice under the Act.
Exactly. So that's the post-notice stage. So we would serve the notice, and that would place the enfranchisement claim on a fixed kind of train, where a fixed timeline, where the landlord would have 2 months to come back and respond. State their premium proposals, state their proposals for the terms of the transfer. They could even state their requirements around flats that are retained in the freehold, whether they're going to take those flats on long leases, or whether they're going to insist on the enfranchising group buying them. So that notice will come back, and when that notice is received, then the clients will be advised really what the issues are, and the principal, the core issue on most of these claims is the price, and we tend to put that issue with the client surveyor to deal with, and where it can't be ironed out by negotiation, we would push the button and issue first-tier tribunal proceedings to force agreement. And so the issue of those proceedings, it really does drive the case to either a very swift hearing date where any issues, including the terms in which the freehold is transferred, or the terms of any supplementary documents like leasebacks and other things are set in stone, and then the matter can be geared up for a completion. And I think at that stage, the enfranchising group, they really need to when you're on when you're on the home run, the group really needs to be conscious that they have to be collecting the fund in. The anticipated completion amount needs to really be paid quite promptly. There's a fairly there is a strict requirement to complete these matters once an agreement's reached. And it's usually within 2 months, and that period can be extended if there is reason to do so. But yeah, that really is the process.
And would you say that a lot of these cases go to tribunal? Because I think we probably manage to settle most of them before they kind of get to that stage. Do you think?
Well, the cases that go to tribunal are the ones that I think I would say need to go to tribunal. There is a cost benefit, or an economic benefit to the client to push these matters or these issues through the tribunal and not make concessions. So on where it's simply a question of how much they pay, and there's no complexity outside the premium aspect, then it's very unlikely to go to a hearing. I mean, I'd imagine, from just statistically speaking, it's about 0.5% of our cases would go just on a simple principle of how much, because the tribunal directions will force the parties essentially to come to some agreement and narrow the issues. And the freeholder is not going to engage and expend money, with surveyors and lawyers to where there's no benefit to him, and they can't get an enhancement on the price. So the cases that we've seen go recently are where we're curing defects in buildings. We're arguing that things need to be removed from leases, or the landlord's imposed terms are unreasonable, and the alternative to not go to tribunal would be to pay them money which they shouldn't receive. So it's clearly a benefit for the clients to run the case in that direction.
Yeah. And then once they obviously have acquired the freehold, the leaseholders are able to grant themselves 999-year lease extensions.
Yes, I mean, in fact, that is advisable. I mean, it's recommended. So people, if you buy the freehold interest, and everyone in the group is paying a substantial sum into that interest. So the freehold cost £100,000 between 10 people. If you do nothing after you purchase the freehold, the £100,000 premium is still in the freehold interest. Now, the individual participants, they'll want to have that money extracted out of the freehold, the value, and put into their leases. And they may also want to make changes to their leases, which would have been discussed and agreed in the pre-notice stage. And that could be, additional demise or licenses for alterations. It could be anything really. I mean, it really depends on what the clients have picked up on. When they had dealings with the old freeholder, what was the bugbear in the lease? I mean, we're going through a process at the moment where we're completely rewriting a lease because the clients don't like it, so that anything, as long as you've got agreement amongst the group, you can rewrite the leases and you can extend them to infinity.
Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, how long does this enfranchisement process normally take?
It takes about 8 to 10 months normally. You have probably about 2 months for the pre-notice, kind of setting the matter up and getting everything, getting the budget formalised and the structure formalised, and then it's about 6 months to get the agreement, and then 2 months to get the conveyancing aspects done.